think this is the year of just more exponential software being created. There's just going to be so much more software in the world. And we're going to need people to maintain it. That is not something we can get around. Like, unfortunately, these things aren't to the point yet that they can full stop be autonomous. With more software, it's going to be the need for more human operators.
The entire industry has shifted. There's a lot of money around, but I'm not sure if there's a lot of money still for open source. Hi, this is Brian Douglas, and you're listening to Open Source Ready, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the evolution of open source software and its impact on the tech landscape. Along with my co-host John McBride, we'll explore topics like open source AI, the business, and the life and sustainability of open source. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/opensourceready. Welcome to another installment of Open Source Ready, end of the year recap. John, how you doing?
It's the recap. I'm doing good. How are you, Brian?
Good. Yeah. So we crossed our year, but also we're ending 2025 with this episode as well. Mm-hmm. So I thought it would be fun. Actually, no, you thought it would be fun to do this. It was your idea originally.
Yeah.
To basically go through the last year and talk about all the episodes we have done basically in the last year. Yeah. And to sort of like relive the moments.
Yeah.
So, John, you ready to jump in?
I'm ready to jump in. Let's go.
Cool. So we started actually in 2024, November of 2024. And first, probably 6 episodes out the gate were all themed around open source sustainability, but also money in open source. And I had a bunch of really cool conversations that we had with our guests. But I'd say like the ones that actually stood out for me was, I think really Chad Whitaker and the Open Source Pledge kind of hit home because we had a bunch of billboards, specifically in Oakland and San Francisco. Funny enough, I was in re:Invent and saw some billboards, Century billboards. I guess they have the same designer.
Oh, nice.
So they're still at it.
Yeah.
But what was really cool was like we got to really learn about what Century thinks about open source sustainability, Open Source Pledge initiative. So it's operations inside of Century. But then we also talked to sustainability from Toby Langell as well.
Yeah.
And what he's doing. It was an interesting time because now it was like right before the sort of advent of agents and coding agents.
Right.
Like we barely had cursor agent at that point. But the entire industry has shifted where sustainability is less about can we support this, but more of it is about the money now at this point. And I think it's been interesting to view outside, but also on the inside of like, there's a lot of money around, but I'm not sure if there's a lot of money still for open source. So I'd be curious, like, what are your thoughts on since we had all these conversations?
Yeah. I think that conversation with Toby really stood out for me as well. Just hearing from him about some of these like just wild vulnerabilities that have gone through the JavaScript ecosystem that he's a part of, as well as just like throughout the industry in the last 5 years. I think it speaks to just the amount of software that's been created, that is being created, but then also how deeply a lot of that integrates with our day-to-day. I think the CrowdStrike thing, where airports shut down and everything, that was in 2024, right?
Yeah.
But still, like that rings true for so many people around how like deeply these things integrate. I'd be curious what Toby's thoughts would be now with the advent of all these AI agents shipping even more code, possibly more vulnerable code, and like how we can sustain that now that some of the software development life cycle has changed a little bit.
Yeah. Someone who I've been wanting to get on the podcast, and hopefully we'll get them on in 2026, is Firas Abugudije from Socket Security. Firas's experiences, he built NPM Fund.
Oh, yeah.
And specifically, basically, when you NPM install, it had like a little banner that says you could sponsor this project. A lot of people had a lot of reaction to that.
Yeah.
Which I think we brought up in Chad's episode as well.
Yeah.
But Firas is now working on a very adjacent problem, which is security. So, and you have a bunch of AI-generated code. They're finding vulnerabilities of folks who are trying to find backdoors into things like Claude Code,
right?
Which we saw a few months ago only, like a bunch of NPM vulnerabilities, because now you don't have to be an expert on the project. You could actually use projects and make legitimate contributions with code.
Yeah.
But then, like, you could also slip in a backdoor.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty sophisticated what people are doing nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, not to bury the lead too much, but one of my predictions for the next year would be that exactly, that like the scale and type and proliferation of these vulnerabilities will just continue and continue. One of the biggest ones that I don't think we've mentioned on the podcast recently is this Shai Halud vulnerability that was basically a worm, which we haven't seen a major worm type of vulnerability since, I don't know, like the 90s or something, when everybody was just email forwarding stuff all over the place to each other and just opening attachments, right? But this thing would just go and replicate itself, open up new repositories in your org, steal secrets, and then go and do the same in other packages that were within your org. And that all was basically executed through some prompting inside of a string to like get Claude code and to get some of these agents to like go and do a thing, which is very scary. That that makes detecting these things semantically in code much more difficult. That type of vulnerability, I think, will be more and more that we see as we go forward.
Yeah, and this is something that I really enjoyed. One of our guests we had actually in the 2025. So first half of 2025, we had Mitchell Hashimoto come on and talk about Ghosty. And the thing actually happened like right after he joined us, as he shared a PR, which is basically as part of your contributing guide for contributing Ghosty, is you have to disclose that you're using AI to generate code. Like you can still do it,
right?
But you need to disclose that, like, because you're going to have a different review experience. If you know folks that maybe not be as but Ghosties and Zig. So like maybe you don't know Zig as well. Maybe you sort of like generate a bunch of stuff to like kickstart like what you were trying to accomplish.
Right.
But at least gives the human in the loop a proper, I guess, leg up in the review process, which I thought was one, fascinating having a conversation with Mitchell, but also seeing that come out like shortly after we had chatted with him.
Right. Yeah, that was a great conversation. I think that was probably one of the highlights for me of the year. Just hearing about his thought process, hearing about how he uses AI agents, obviously getting to discuss the open source side of HashiCorp and that exit, and where some of those things from our favorite topic, open source licenses, went one way or another. Yeah, it was a great conversation.
Yeah. And then the whole first half of 2025 was really around agents. Well, actually, it wasn't even about agents. It was around MCP. So we ended up having Steve Manuel talk about MCP run. I've since talked to Steve offline. He's working on Turbo MCP now, which is like an enterprise-grade solution for having basically a one OAuth experience to manage all your MCPs.
Right.
Because what I've actually found since then is a lot of folks are building their own MCPs internal for the enterprise, because it is around the trust part. Like, so if I'm going to use I think up until maybe a couple weeks ago, Slack, or actually still today at the time of this recording, Slack doesn't have an official MCP. So you have to use a community version of the Slack MCP, which just wraps a bunch of API endpoints and then adds AI to it.
Right.
Which could be super, like there could be a backdoor in one of those things. And I think, the fear of a lot of enterprises is like, we need to sanitize all these interactions, especially if the LLM is going to be touching our code and even, God forbid, our databases.
Right.
Or even our Slack database are of a bunch of threads and information that is in there. So for that reason, glad that Slack has a proper MCP coming out soon. But it's interesting probably the first interaction I saw around MCP was from Steve Manuel. But then we also talked to the Goose folks.
That's right.
Ace from Block, which was also like, I think you had mentioned Goose. We got Goose on, but I had not even used Goose. I wasn't even aware of the actual application of it. And I've only just seen Goose like nonstop since then.
Yeah. And that conversation was great too, because that was a tee off into how a lot of different companies and products and things sort of think about the types of models and those inference provider APIs that they're using. Because I think Goose was very early on this kind of train of like, oh yeah, you can configure OpenAI, or you could configure Anthropic, or even local Olama, or any of these other ways of doing it. I think that will be continuing to be very important as, like token costs probably shift going into the future. Different providers have better, different models. Another shout out to a conversation we had with Quinn Slack, now at the AMP company, with the formerly Sourcegraph, I guess. They do this frequently, where they will switch around the model that they use for AMP based on some of their internal evaluations, probably test suites and real evals that they run, trying to always get the best experience for the cost that you're paying.
Yeah. And this is something that, it's funny because we talked to Quinn, we talked about the sort of like switching models on demand and like the routing. But one of the things actually, to be quite frank, like I didn't really like Cody back in the day, because I didn't like even the current version of Copilot, because you have to constantly switch between models to get your best experience.
Right.
And for someone who was like brand new to using Cody agents, in like its current form, like I don't want to choose as soon as I log in, I've got to like find the best model.
Right.
What if I could tell you what I'm trying to accomplish and you pick the best model for me? And I think what AMP was doing with the sort of ads within AMP Free, which you spent a good amount of time talking about that on that episode with Quinn. I think we're going to have a bit more of that moving forward. Like in our last episode with Cameron, which actually will come out in this, we had talked about ads in our reads, ads in LLMs. But I think there's going to be a sort of shift, and like somebody's going to have to be covering the cost of this inference and compute.
Yeah.
And it might be in the way of like, we will just provide you the recommended sort of I'm feeling lucky type experience, rather than constantly always trying for you to do evals and choose whatever the best model is for the job.
Yeah, totally. This makes me think of a conversation that we had as well this year with Josh Rosso from Reddit, where we did kind of go more into the technical deep dive on running huge Kubernetes clusters at scale for Reddit, how they go into some of that, but then also just like the raw engineering resources, the cost to go and do that, and how that plays into, real product that then becomes a part of, I guess, Reddit in this sense. And Reddit ads probably feeds the true cost of infrastructure. So yeah, I think that, there's been a lot of subsidizing in AI, a lot of subsidizing for tokens. Clearly, there's going to have to be something that changes or shifts.
Yeah.
We'll see where that goes. We had a lot of conversations also, Brian, this year about open source AI. Where is your head at with that? Like, what's your reflection on where open source AI is?
Yeah. My reflection is like, man, I really wanted to get the GPT OSS team from OpenAI on. I have a DM with them, and we're pretty friendly, but the timing didn't quite work out. I thought towards the end of the summer of 2025, like we got the advent of a bunch of really good open source models. Obviously, we got DeepSeek, and I think January of last year, or this year rather.
Yeah, the Kiwi ones recently.
Yeah, so like we're getting good models, but I think what the models are doing is really just giving us like more unfiltered access to LLMs to help build what it's actually enabling, which is the new wave of infrastructure and AI. So because you can have access to models, you don't have to go through the gate or worry about inference. And if you have something, I don't think we spent any time on this on the podcast, but like NVIDIA shipped the Spark boxes. So now you can have GPUs in like a Mac Mini style container.
Yeah.
So if you want to do AI coding, like you can get all open models working for like about less than $2,000 in a very portable box. So take it to your work in your backpack and plug it into. It's funny, right outside the booth, we got 2 or 3 of these things that we were testing, and we were able to talk about it in a blog post.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be probably the opportunity there is like we'll have LLMs that we can do in consumer grade hardware.
Yes.
And that's very approachable. But I'm still holding out. We spent some time talking to Rachel Lee about this. SLMs.
Yeah.
I'm holding out for the opportunity to like do more stuff for the stuff on my iPhone. Like to be able to source through all my text messages and look for like something specific and have like that knowledge, which even like today's Siri and Apple Intelligence doesn't quite give me that yet.
Yeah.
I would love to like spend a weekend with the SLM on my phone that's not going to overheat the thing and just like index all my my text messages and photos into a model.
Yeah.
And give me the experience that I expect Apple to give me. And maybe in 2026, Apple will give us that experience by maybe WWDC.
Yeah.
But yeah, open models, it's going to help open source continue to like make a stab at the footprint of the industry. The one thing that we didn't spend a ton of time talking to is like any sort of the vector DBs, because I feel like what PG Vector did to vector DBs, like by providing a open source plugin for all Postgres, makes that extremely approachable. So like when I build something, I'm doing PG Vector inside of Supabase. It's like a non-question. I've definitely grown out of Supabase and PG Vector for one of my projects, and I'm using Chroma for that now. But I think what we're seeing in LLMs, like we're going to see way more tooling in open source that are be driven through some of these open models. So expect to see more Chinese models come out in the coming weeks and coming months. And we might just have like a twice annual cycle of like some of the more premier foundational open source models come out. We'll have a great time with it, but then we'll get another Claude or GPT model that gets us to forget about them.
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting you bring up vector databases because something I've sort of observed over the last year is this kind of hilarious, like full circle moment that we're having with some of this stuff. Where like very early on, there was GPT 3.5, the context window was tiny. Everybody was building RAG and talking about, vectorizing stuff and doing this retrieval augmented generation in order to sort of lighten the load on the small context windows with some of these models. Then context windows just got huge, and there's like millions of tokens that some of these models can support. So people kind of stopped doing that and just started just shoving all kinds of stuff into the context windows. Then we got MCP to kind of standardize how you could do tool calling. But now we're kind of going full circle back around to vector databases. And I do think that vector databases will continue to be an important technology in this space, because we're seeing people build these things. Like recently, Anthropic had a blog post about their search tool that goes and searches all the tools within an MCP sort of Uber thing, because too many tools just pollutes the context window too fast, where like 10%, 20% of your 100,000 tokens just immediately gets eaten up by the initialization flow for MCP. So then that makes me think like, oh, we're just going to go all the way back around to RAG if we're trying to search for tools. I think the kind of circular nature of some of this stuff is going to possibly continue.
Speaking of which, like, I'm curious, is like we kind of ran through a bunch of the highlights of the episodes we had. Towards the last like 4 or 5 months, we've really been talking to a bunch of folks in the infrastructure space. And I love the conversation with Dims and learning about what he's doing really for the Kubernetes space, but also now at NVIDIA. Recently, AWS, but now NVIDIA, because I feel like the entire world of infrastructure, like it had been sitting on the sidelines really for a lot of this AI stuff. So we had a lot of MLOps, and we had Anyscale has Ray, and they just donated their project to the PyTorch Foundation, and VLM got donated to the foundation.
Yep.
And we have a bunch of other open source stuff that's actually Mike over there who's leading the PyTorch Foundation, who we should definitely have on as a guest on the podcast.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be more and more projects that we're seeing that we're depending on, like PG Vector, that probably belong in a foundation to help build a standard to give us some confidence for large enterprises to ship AI and LLMs to production, but in a safe way that's consistent. So we're not constantly always looking for the next SaaS product to unblock us, but we can now ship some stuff confidently. And like ideally, these SaaS products also shipped over there, like what the standards are. Hey, Future Brian here. And it turns out right after we recorded this conversation, the Agentic AI Foundation was announced. So just wanted to drop a note about that, because obviously I'm predicting something that happens literally 2 days after we recorded this. At the time that we released this, the Agentic Foundation's been out for, at this point, 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Kubernetes ecosystem and what Dims was telling us about, dynamic resource allocation and just enabling GPU workloads to be so much more ergonomic and better, because it's very painful right now. That alone, I think, will just be a huge unlock for infrastructure teams going and building some of these like massive, 1,000+ node clusters with big pools of GPUs. That software, I think, goes pretty along the lines with the big data center and actual, raw GPU infrastructure build-outs that are happening. So yeah, it's wild and exciting times.
Yeah, and this is something that going back to full circle, we had started talking about Atom, and I was DMing you about System Initiative, because I'm very excited about what the product that they sort of unveiled in the last few months. I think like September of this year, I'd share like their agentic workflow and platform. Previously, System Initiative, like Terramate, they're all like to help enable Terraform, OpenTofu.
Right.
But it feels as if like we're moving into a new ecosystem of like agents are here to stay. So like as we figure out how do we work around these and how do we work with them, it feels like there's a world that we're getting new primitives for deploying stuff at scale,
right?
And for maintaining software at large enterprises. So I'll get your take on that, but I do want to shift over to like future like outlook on 2026.
Yeah, I think, it's System Initiative and just like where some of those paradigms are. I'll be very curious to see like how SRE teams integrate those, or I guess more, to say another way, is like how they adopt it, or if they adopt it. Because if there's a group that's probably more cautious or risk averse to adopting this kind of technology, it would be SREs who, whole job is basically to, not get paged like I did today at 4 a.m. They want the determinism of like, I can look at a dashboard, understand those graphs, understand like how some of these things go. But, a lot of this is becoming kind of the mental mapping of like what an LLM can go and understand. I was playing around today with the Playwright MCP server for Microsoft. Is very, very good. And it's so good because it kind of shifts that paradigm mindset, that mapping of like me looking at a browser or looking at the dev tools. And instead, the MCP server can show those things in, I guess, really more like text to the agent so that it can go and click and play around with things. And I can see what it's doing as it's clicking around and then building my test suite for me. Instead of me being like, no, I see the button. The button is labeled this. Please click the button so that you can do the test. That mental mapping is different for an agent. And I think we'll see tooling that continues to kind of conform to that mental mapping for agents, which really is like text, language, essentially.
Yeah, which I want to shift gears. And so we're not going to do any reads today, but we're going to do some predictions.
Brian, are you ready to predict?
Oh, I am, John.
Predictions.
Yeah, so I want to look forward to 2026 because this will help me think through like what guests are we bringing on? Where do we think the industry is going, especially the open source? And I think AI has always had like a strong grapple on a lot of our conversations as well.
Yeah.
So I'll go first. I'll share my prediction for 2026, which I'm calling this the rise of the solo contributor. And I want to be very distinct about like this is definitely their maintainers, but I want to be distinctive that these are contributors as well, because we're starting to see folks who are building ideas, building projects, and not waiting for like a validation or adoption or consensus. They're just building and they're throwing stuff out there. Like the speed to tech debt is like at an all-time high, but also the speed to validation is even higher.
Yeah.
So like if you have an idea and you're like, hey, I was talking to Jason Linksdorf about this, and Jason would be a good guest for this because he's seeing a lot of this in what he's doing with his YouTube channel.
Oh yeah.
Which in hackathons, like everyone has ambition, but like to get to presentation form, like you'd probably have like 15 to 20% success rate.
Mm.
And when I was talking to MLH just a couple weeks ago in New York during the AI Engineering Code Summit, they're saying 90% success rate in hackathons. So when you think about open source, it's like almost the same spin where folks have ideas, they do a thing. They might have not all the sort of wherewithal of like how to maintain a project or structure it, but they can get something into someone's hands pretty quickly. So we're going to see, one, a lot of open source disruption. So you asked about the LLMs. Like we're going to see a bunch of LLMs like be successful for short spurts, but it's going to fuel the testing of all this open source infrastructure and projects around specifically. I think as of today, I think we saw Tanner, who, again, I'm going to say this out loud because I need to have Tanner on this podcast and we should chat with him. He just shipped an AI SDK, very competitive to Vercel. And it's called TanStack. And Tanner is very popular he lives off sponsorship. So he's been fueling the sort of offshoot of the React community, which a bunch of tools everyone loves and enjoys.
Yeah.
At Open Source, we use the TanStack table pretty heavily, and we'll talk to that maintainer on a regular basis. And so we're now seeing like AI SDKs and infrastructure now being not necessarily disrupted yet, but providing a pathway into like, if you want to have no vendor lock-in, you have an opportunity to leverage some tools that people are building. So I also expect a large amount of consolidation from this open source drive. So what we're seeing right now, in the last week, we saw Bun get acquired by Anthropic.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely amazing. Like a great get for Anthropic. Like Bun is powering a bunch of like next wave, like front-end ecosystem and technology. So the opportunity to like go build something with no sort of corporate overlords and get stuff out to market and get some adoption.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And then more than likely, big cloud, large foundational models, basically pick and choose for talent purposely. So we might not see all these projects live on, but we'll see some of these folks get absorbed into some of the bigger clouds and bigger models to help hopefully fuel ourselves away from a recession. I'm not sure if that will be that's a whole other prediction, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. I honestly couldn't agree more. I sort of look at it almost more from like a operational standpoint. Again, maybe I'm putting on like the SRE hat here, where some of these things just get so much easier to operate. And I think teams will feel more enabled to go and like adopt technologies and things that maybe, 5 or 10 years ago would have just been like huge lifts, but now are maybe easier to get started with or, ramp up onto or understand, error states that things might get into, just because the unlock is LLMs essentially on that. Maybe scary as well. Like maybe you could spin that and think like, oh, this is the year that tech debt just completely, balloons and exponentially explodes. And that's one of my predictions. which really aligns with what you're saying about people starting to build more and more softwares. I think this is the year of just more exponential software being created. There's just going to be so much more software in the world, like full stop. There's just going to be so much software out there. And we're going to need people to maintain it. That is not something we can get around. Like, unfortunately, these things aren't to the point yet that they can full stop be autonomous. But, with more software, it's going to be the need for more human operators, be it people who are enabled, who maybe aren't in the traditional software path of things. But one of the things that I think validates this for me is Minio recently is kind of abandoning their open source, efforts, and instead is making really the full lean into the business. One of the alternatives people are talking about is Rust FS, which is a S3 compatible file system that you can deploy and run distributed, like Minio or S3 really. It's so interesting because that's part of that consolidation that you're talking about. It's like really a lot of time, energy, and effort to maintain and run an open source project, especially a huge one like Minio. So maybe we'll just see people be like, well, oh, that's okay. We can adopt RustFS because we can go and understand it faster than maybe we would if we needed like an army of people to go and like get involved in the community and understand how some of this stuff worked. Like maybe it's more akin to like smaller teams being able to adopt these things.
Yeah.
I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And you were talking about this like this overrun with software. Like,
yeah,
I moved to San Francisco 10 years ago, and it was at a point where you couldn't find a place to live because like the rents were so high. Like the demand for being in San Francisco was pretty much at its peak at that moment, like 2015, 2016. And then we saw the pandemic where it was almost as if it was a ghost town. So you had all this infrastructure, but no one using it, particularly in housing. But we're seeing sort of an uptick where I think this is probably, if you look historically, cities work in this fashion. Like there's like everyone's moving to cities, everyone's moving out of cities. You're having new waves of folks like embedding themselves in the community. And I think with the same with software. I think we also had like 2 years ago, it felt like AI was taking over in infrastructure and like dev tools. They didn't really have a time in the sunlight. And it's completely shifted 180 in the last year, where you're seeing a lot more dev tools and infrastructure like taking on funding and like scaling up teams. And like one of my favorite companies I've been a part of is Superbase. And Superbase is now just had a big talk at AWS re:Invent, and they're announced a big round and like open source first opportunity that now is like giving a lot of light to some of these like serverless database experiences in a way that we saw with Mongo like 15 or 12 years ago. So yeah, I'm bullish. I'm bullish on all this stuff. Like obviously we have a looming recession that could definitely hit, but we also have a lot of energy and interest in like fueling the next wave of this technology. So like I think there will always be a need for us to like rebuild and like restack our stuff that's going to now be AI friendly, right? But I think thanks to the advent of like what DIMS is doing at the Kubernetes side, and then we have like a lot of these AI projects in CNCF now graduating, there's going to be a lot more efforts to start deploying and get sustainability within infrastructure of AI. There's a large social network I talked at CNCF in one of the side chats, and they were back in KubeCon London. They were very shy to deploy AI to production because they didn't have the same tooling you would have for CPUs as you do with GPUs. And we're seeing now a company I'm very excited about called ZML, which I'd love to have on the podcast, is doing autoscaling of GPUs. We had Run AI, who's also got acquired by NVIDIA, that's also leading efforts to acquire more open source projects to help solve this specific problem. So I know VCs are happy in investing AI. I know folks are happy to now contribute and distribute AI. So now we could sort of sit back and just be proud developers that can have cool tooling.
Yeah, it's very true. Speaking of tooling, I think one of my predictions is on code. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, but I'm calling this the AI code flywheel. I think that we could see, maybe this is a little bit more out there, I think we could see agentic flows and the way that people are deploying these workflows or these autonomous agents or whatever you want to call them align much more closely with raw code. One of the things I would point to is that same blog post Anthropic was talking about, search tool. They also introduced this capability of Claude skills, I think is what they're calling it, or code skills or something like that. And it's basically a way for Claude Code to just run some Python. This isn't really like a new novel idea. Like I think you could do this way back with basically tool calls in LangChain way back in the day and a lot of these older frameworks. But I wouldn't be surprised if we got to the point where these agents can write their own skills in code, which they're already very good at, and then they can sort of provide those as capabilities to themselves to then just spin that flywheel on like, well, I need to make this thing a little bit better because I need to do this other thing. Oh, it'll work on that little code piece, and then it'll have that as a skill back to itself. And then maybe it'll even ingrain more of those capabilities as these things just get better and better and better. I think that's kind of the dream that a lot of AI companies, ML engineers, AI researchers want, is that flywheel of like continual self-improvement. So I wouldn't be surprised if, we saw these things getting more and more aligned with just code because they're very good at writing code.
Yeah. Andrew Karpathy gave a talk around the self-healing infrastructure. And I think I've already seen Century and Vercel with billboards or like blog posts around this. And I think this is a thing that I think the dream will come true and become like alive. And again, there's a bunch of tools in the space that I think they're going to be attacking this. The one thing I've learned, especially because I continue, and we're doing like the continuous AI thing, and that's kind of built on the self-healing infrastructure thing. What we found is the natural language is one of the best ways to, like for folks who are like zero to tech debt and like maybe solo contributors, in natural language, you could say, hey, I don't want this thing to go down, or it went down. Let's think through like, how do we fix this? As long as the sort of endpoints and the connections, like with MCP, ACP, whatever, as long as those are there, the natural language can get you there.
Yeah.
That's what the biggest unlock is what I've discovered, especially doing a bunch of workshops around AI coding for folks in all different walks of life, is like you're as good as the knowledge you have in your brain.
Yes.
So if you read a book about designing data-intensive infrastructure, you'll know what to prompt because you read the book. That's the kind of shift when I think about this AI coding in like these entry points, is like if you have the concept and a context of like what are the boxes you're trying to derive and where you're trying to put the boxes, you'll have a much better job than like build me full stack app, no bugs.
Right.
Like that's never going to work. And
it's like early on with ChatGPT, people were like, generate an idea that'll make me $1 billion. Go.
Yeah.
And obviously it's not going to do that because, it's the mass sum of all human knowledge at this point, and it's a bit too broad, I guess.
Excellent. Well, this is I'm going to wind down the conversation. Appreciate you, John, taking some time.
Of course.
At the end of the year. Also, thank you for being the co-host with me these last 12 months.
Always.
It has been a ride, but honestly, it's been a pretty smooth ride.
Yeah.
Looking forward to 2026.
Yeah. Looking forward to 2026. I'm ready to stay ready, Brian.
Yeah. Stay ready, listeners. That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us at x.com/opensourceready. Open Source Ready is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor of developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com.